welcome to our deep dive into Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
We all celebrate it, but have you ever thought about, where all the traditions come from?
Right.
Today, we're going beyond the presents and carols and all that to explore the history and meaning of Christmas.
Yeah.
And we've got some sources that might just blow your mind.
Interesting.
So, to get us started, we're looking at this blog post with a pretty bold claim.
Okay.
Christmas is satanic.
All right.
And to get a different perspective, we're also exploring this article from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association
Okay.
called What is the Deeper Meaning of Christmas?
Okay.
So two very different takes.
Yeah.
Should be interesting.
Okay.
Okay, let's start with the basics.
All right.
We all know Christmas is celebrated on December 25th to honor the birth of Jesus.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Early Christians didn't actually celebrate Jesus' birth.
That's right. The December 25th date didn't become the official celebration until the 4th century, and the source suggests that this timing wasn't random. It was likely chosen to coincide with already existing pagan festivals.
Like Saturnalia.
Exactly.
This Roman festival was a week-long party in mid-December,
Yeah.
dedicated to Saturn, their god of agriculture and abundance.
Mm-hmm.
Sound familiar?
The parallels are striking.
Cool.
Saturnalia was all about feasting, gift-giving decorations. Even a carnival atmosphere.
Uh-huh.
Sounds a lot like our Christmas celebrations we know and love, doesn't it?
Totally.
Yeah.
But there's this other element of Saturnalia that I find really intriguing.
Okay.
It involved, complete reversal of social roles.
Oh, wow.
Masters would serve their slaves.
Really?
And they'd even elect a king of Saturnalia just for fun.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating how that tradition reflects this kind of utopian ideal where social hierarchies are temporarily overturned.
Right.
And this blending of traditions is a key point in our Christmas's satanic source. It argues that early Christian leaders may have chosen December 25th to make Christmas more appealing to people who were already celebrating these pagan holidays.
So it was a way to ease the transition to Christianity
Exactly.
by incorporating familiar elements.
Huh.
That's a pretty strategic move.
And this is where the Roman Emperor Constantine comes into play.
Okay.
He was the first Christian emperor, and he's often credited with establishing December 25th as the official date for Christmas.
Right.
But there's a twist.
Oh, I love a good twist.
Well, even after Constantine's conversion to Christianity,
Right.
he continued to worship Sol Invictus, the Roman sun god,
Right.
and Mithras, a god whose birthday was also celebrated on, you guessed it, December 25th.
So he was hedging his bets.
Yeah.
Worshiping both the Christian god and these other deities.
That's what our source suggests, and it raises some interesting questions about the sincerity of Constantine's conversion. It even highlights Matthew 6.24,
Okay.
where it says, "No man can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon."
For those who might not be familiar with that verse,
Yeah.
could you elaborate on what mammon means?
Yeah.
And how the source connects it to Constantine and Christmas?
Mammon is often interpreted as wealth or material possessions,
Good.
representing worldly desires and greed.
Uh-huh.
The source uses this verse to suggest that Constantine was trying to serve both God and these worldly powers,
Right.
symbolized by his continued worship of Sol Invictus and Mithras.
I see.
It sees this as a fundamental conflict, questioning the purity of his motives in establishing December 25th as the date for Christmas.
So the very date we celebrate might be rooted in a compromise between Christianity and paganism.
That's what the source is suggesting.
That's definitely not something you hear in your typical Christmas carol.
No, it's not something you usually think about.
Right.
And this leads to another question.
Okay.
Was December 25th even Jesus' actual birthday?
Yeah, I've always wondered about that. Is there any historical evidence to support it?
The Bible itself doesn't actually mention a specific date for Jesus' birth, based on historical context and other clues.
Yeah.
Some scholars believe he was likely born sometime between 4 and 6 BCE.
So a few years earlier than we typically celebrate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our source claims it was actually Pope Julius VI who officially chose December 25th for Christmas,
Really?
likely sometime after Constantine's reign.
But if that's the case, why December 25th?
Yeah.
Was it just a random date? Or was there something more going on?
That's the heart of the mystery, isn't it?
Right.
The source points to the already existing pagan festivals on that date
Right.
and suggests it was a calculated decision to align Christmas with these celebrations,
Yeah.
making it easier for people to accept.
Okay, so we've got the date of Christmas potentially linked to these ancient pagan festivals.
Mm,
But what about all the other traditions,
yeah,
like the shepherds visiting baby Jesus?
right.
Does that fit with a December birth?
That's a great question, and it's something our source examines through the lens of Alexander Hislop's book, The Two Babylons,
Okay.
which dives into the pagan origins of various Christian traditions.
And what does Hislop say about those shepherds?
He argues that shepherds wouldn't have been out in the fields watching their flocks at night in December.
Right.
It would have been too cold, especially in that region.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be caught out in the freezing cold with a flock of sheep.
Right.
And if we look at the story in Luke 2,
Yeah.
it describes shepherds in the fields being told about Jesus' birth by an angel and then traveling to see the baby.
So the source is saying that the biblical account doesn't really line up with the December birth?
Exactly.
Oh,
It points out the impracticality of traveling in winter,
right.
especially with a newborn.
Yeah.
It suggests that this detail might contradict the idea of Jesus being born in December.
And remember, we already learned that both Mithras and Sol Invictus were celebrated on December 25th.
That's right. And considering Constantine's initial allegiance to these deities,
Right.
it adds another layer to the source's argument that December 25th was chosen to absorb those pagan traditions into the new Christian holiday.
Okay, so the date itself is potentially problematic, but what about the Christmas tree?
Ah, the Christmas tree.
Where does that fit into all of this?
It's such a central part of the holiday,
Right.
but the two Babylons suggests it might have some pretty deep and unexpected roots.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does the source say about it?
It delves into the symbolism, claiming the Christmas tree could represent a pagan concept of a Messiah figure, the man the branch.
Hmm.
The source even links this to ancient traditions and deities like Baal Tamar and Baal Berith.
So the tree itself is tied to these ancient pagan beliefs.
That's what the source is suggesting, and it gets
Wait.
even more complex.
All right.
It claims that both the Yule log and the Christmas tree symbolize the death and rebirth of the god Nimrod.
Nimrod, I'm not familiar with that name.
He's a figure from the Bible, often associated with rebellion against God. And according to this source, putting up a Christmas tree is essentially a subconscious act of worshiping him.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
Ah.
So decorating my tree is actually a pagan ritual.
That's the argument the source is making.
Okay.
It sees the Christmas tree as a symbol of the Antichrist and rebellion against God.
Talk about a holiday controversy.
Yeah.
So how does Jesus fit into all of this?
The source presents a stark contrast between Nimrod, this figure of rebellion and human ambition, and Jesus Christ, the true Messiah who embodies humility and submission to God's will.
So it's like a clash between two opposing forces with Christmas traditions being linked to the wrong side.
Exactly, and it doesn't stop there.
Okay.
The source goes on to examine other Christmas elements through the same lens,
Yeah.
looking for hidden meanings and connections to paganism.
Okay, this is getting really interesting. Let's dive into those other elements in part 2 of our deep dive. Welcome back. We're uncovering some surprising claims about Christmas and how it might be more connected to ancient paganism than we realized.
And we've just scratched the surface.
Mhm.
Right, there are so many layers to unpack.
Yeah.
And our source really goes deep in analyzing the symbolism and origins of these seemingly innocent traditions.
So before the break, we were about to delve into some other Christmas elements
Right.
and how they're interpreted by the Christmas' satanic source.
Okay.
Where do we go from here?
Let's talk about those twinkling lights that adorn our homes and Christmas trees.
Wow.
They seem so festive and cheerful,
Yeah.
but our source suggests they might have a darker meaning.
Okay, this is where it gets a little spooky.
Oh.
What's the connection between Christmas lights and paganism?
Well, the source argues that these lights are actually a representation of Sol Invictus,
Uh-huh.
the Roman sun god we talked about earlier.
Right, his birthday was also celebrated on December 26th.
Exactly.
So by stringing up lights, we're unknowingly paying tribute to this ancient sun god.
That's the claim. And it goes even further, suggesting that those lights are a kind of counterfeit light
Okay.
intended to distract people from the true light of Jesus Christ.
That's a pretty heavy interpretation. Is there anything in the Bible that supports this idea of a false light?
Actually, there is. The source points to 2 Corinthians 11.42,
Okay.
which warns that Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light.
Mm.
It suggests that Christmas lights could be a subtle form of deception,
Right.
leading people away from true faith.
Okay, that's a bit unsettling. What about the star on top of the tree?
Yeah.
It's always seemed like a pretty clear symbol of the Star of Bethlehem guiding the wise men to Jesus.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But our source presents a very different interpretation.
Okay.
It claims that the star on top of the Christmas tree could actually symbolize Lucifer.
Lucifer, as in the fallen angel, Satan himself. That's quite a leap.
It is, and it connects this interpretation back to the idea of Satan masquerading as an angel of light.
Hmm.
It's all part of this larger argument that Christmas is a deceptive holiday, pulling people away from true worship.
And what about the gifts under the tree?
Right.
Is the source saying those are evil too?
Well, it claims that those gifts might be more than just presents.
Okay.
They could be seen as symbolic offerings to demonic deities.
Whoa, cursed gifts.
Mm-hmm.
That's not exactly the Christmas spirit I'm used to.
It's definitely a darker take on the tradition of gift-giving, and the source even brings in a Bible verse to support this claim. It references Deuteronomy 7.26,
Okay.
where God warns the Israelites not to bring cursed objects into their homes.
So is it saying that our Christmas presents could be bringing evil into our homes? Could you explain a little more about that verse
Sure.
and how the source connects it to Christmas gifts?
Deuteronomy 7.26 is part of a larger passage where God is instructing the Israelites to completely destroy the idols and practices of the pagan nations they were conquering.
Right.
The source uses this verse to argue that Christmas gifts, because of their connection to pagan traditions,
Yeah.
could be seen as those forbidden, cursed objects.
That's a pretty intense interpretation.
Yeah.
I've always thought of Christmas gifts as a symbol of generosity and love.
Yeah.
It's hard to reconcile that with the idea of them being cursed.
It definitely challenges our traditional understanding of the holiday, doesn't it? And the source goes even further, suggesting that the Christmas tree itself might be problematic.
Okay.
It argues that the tree, adorned with lights and ornaments, could be seen as a mockery of Jesus' crucifixion.
Wait, how does a decorated tree relate to the crucifixion? For those who might not be familiar with the story, could you explain that connection?
Sure, crucifixion was a form of execution used by the Romans, where the condemned person was nailed to a wooden cross.
Right.
The source draws a parallel between the Christmas tree and the cross,
Okay.
arguing that decorating a tree associated with such a brutal death is disrespectful to Jesus' sacrifice. It even uses a Bible verse to support this claim.
Which verse is that?
Galatians 3.13.
Okay.
It states, "Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, Curse is everyone that hangeth on a tree."
Hmm.
The source uses this passage to connect the tree to the idea of a curse, and suggests that decorating a Christmas tree could be seen as a mockery of the sacrifice Jesus made on the cross.
Okay, so we've got these potentially disturbing interpretations of the tree, the lights, the star, and even the gifts.
Yeah.
Is there anything else the source highlights as being problematic about Christmas?
It also brings in the Old Testament book of Jeremiah,
Okay.
specifically chapter 10,
Uh-huh.
where God warns the Israelites about adopting the customs of pagan nations.
Okay.
It's a powerful passage that condemns practices like idol worship and astrology.
And how does the source link that to Christmas?
It argues that by celebrating Christmas with all of its pagan roots,
Mm-hmm.
we are essentially repeating the mistakes of the Israelites. We're adopting customs that God has clearly condemned.
That's a pretty serious accusation. It's
Yeah.
making me rethink my whole understanding of the holiday.
It's definitely a thought-provoking perspective,
Yeah.
and it forces us to consider where our traditions come from and what
Right.
they might represent. The source even draws a parallel between ancient Rome and Babylon, both empires known for their decadence and opposition to God.
Babylon. Didn't that fall a long time ago?
Yes. But the source uses it as a symbol of corruption and rebellion against God. It even points out that the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible,
Right.
refers to Rome as Babylon, suggesting a spiritual connection between the two.
So the source is implying that celebrating Christmas is like aligning ourselves with those ancient corrupt empires.
That's the argument it's making. It's a pretty stark interpretation.
Yeah.
And it really challenges the traditional view of Christmas as a purely Christian holiday.
Okay, so we've talked about the Roman and Babylonian influence on Christmas. What about the Jewish people? Were they exposed to these pagan traditions too?
That's a great question, and the source does address that. It argues that Jewish people living under Babylonian and Roman rule would have been exposed to pagan customs and festivals,
Okay.
like the Babylonian Akitu festival and, of course, the Roman Saturnalia.
So those pagan traditions would have been all around them.
Exactly. The source highlights the fact that both Akitu and Saturnalia shared themes of renewal and role reversal, similar to what we see in Saturnalia.
Yeah.
It suggests that this shared symbolism might indicate some level of influence or cultural exchange between those ancient cultures.
So even though those empires fell up, their traditions might have lived on and influenced the development of Christmas.
That's the argument the source is making. It's presenting a pretty complex and layered picture of how Christmas came to be,
Yeah.
and it's challenging us to think critically about the origins of our traditions.
Okay, let's talk about another Christmas tradition, mistletoe. It's a symbol of love and peace. Or is it our source seems to have a very different take on it?
It certainly does. Remember Alexander Hislop and his book, The Two Babylons? He pops up again here.
Oh, this is where things get interesting.
Oh.
What does he say about mistletoe?
Well, the source explains that mistletoe has its roots in pagan rituals,
Okay.
particularly those of the ancient Druids.
Uh-huh.
They believed it had magical properties and used it in ceremonies related to fertility, rebirth, and protection.
So it was not always about stealing kisses under the mistletoe?
Not quite. The source goes on to explain that mistletoe was also important in Norse mythology.
Okay.
It's actually connected to the story of Balder, the god of light and beauty,
Mm-hmm.
whose death was caused by a mistletoe dart.
So mistletoe has a much darker and more complex history than we might realize.
That's what the source is suggesting, and it doesn't stop there. It goes on to claim that using mistletoe in our Christmas celebrations is essentially inviting demonic spirits into our homes.
Whoa, that escalated quickly. How does it make that connection? I mean, most people just see mistletoe as a harmless holiday decoration.
It's quite a leap, isn't it?
Right.
The source connects it back to the idea that mistletoe has these inherent pagan connections.
Right.
And those ties to ancient rituals make it inherently dangerous. It even cites Leviticus 19.31 and Deuteronomy 7.26, those Old Testament verses about witchcraft and cursed objects, to support this claim.
So even hanging a sprig of mistletoe above the doorway could be seen as a form of spiritual contamination.
That's the argument the source is making. It's a pretty drastic interpretation,
Yeah.
and it really makes you think twice about those seemingly innocent holiday decorations. But it doesn't stop there. It even has something to say about the tradition of decorating our homes for Christmas.
Okay, I'm ready for another controversial take.
Ah.
What's wrong with decking the halls and putting up a festive wreath?
Well, according to the source, all that decorating is another example of pagan influence creeping into our Christmas celebrations.
Okay.
It claims those traditions actually stem from the Roman celebrations of Saturnalia and Sol Invictus, those same pagan festivals we discussed earlier.
So by hanging tinsel and putting up a Christmas village, we're unknowingly participating in ancient Roman rituals.
That's what the source is suggesting. And it goes even further, arguing that using certain decorations, especially figurines of Santa Claus and angels, could be seen as idolatry.
Idolatry. But they're just decorations.
Yeah.
What's the source's reasoning behind that?
It connects it back to the Ten Commandments,
Okay.
specifically the commandment that forbids creating graven images. It even quotes Exodus 20.4, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image."
Wow. So the source is saying that even those cute little Santa figurines could be seen as a violation of God's commandments. That's a pretty serious claim.
It is. And it argues that by decorating our homes with these images, we're unknowingly inviting demonic forces into our lives, especially those twinkling lights. Remember, the source sees them as a representation of the sun god, Sol Invictus.
This is making me rethink my entire approach to Christmas decorating. It's amazing how much symbolism and history is packed into those traditions we often take for granted.
It really is. And the source we're looking at is really highlighting how intertwined those seemingly innocent Christmas traditions are with ancient pagan practices.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the controversial origins of the date, the symbolism of the tree, and various decorations, and even delved into the unexpected history of mistletoe. But there's still one big element we haven't talked about yet, Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And, you know, our source has some strong opinions about him.
Oh, absolutely. Get ready for some more surprising interpretations, because the source takes aim at the jolly old elf himself,
Okay.
questioning his motives and even his very nature.
Okay, this should be good. Let's take a quick break and then dive into the world of Santa Claus and uncover what our source has to say about him. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our deep dive into the hidden side of Christmas. And let's just say things are about to get interesting. We've explored controversial dates and pagan symbols and even the potential demonic influence behind all those innocent-looking decorations.
Yeah.
But now it's time to tackle the biggest icon of them all,
Right.
Santa Claus.
Yes. Santa Claus, he's become so synonymous with Christmas, a jolly figure of generosity and good cheer.
Mhm.
But our source presents a very different perspective,
Okay.
one that challenges the very foundation of who Santa is and what he represents.
Okay, I'm ready for this. What does the Christmas is Satanic source have to say about Santa? Lay it on me.
Well, it starts by acknowledging Santa's origins,
Oh.
tracing him back to St. Nicholas,
Uh-huh.
a 4th century Christian bishop known for his generosity and kindness.
Right.
It explains how the Dutch tradition of Sinterklaas, based on St. Nicholas, eventually evolved into the Santa Claus we know and love today.
So far, so good. That's the story most of us are familiar with. What's the problem?
The source acknowledges that connection to St. Nicholas,
Okay.
but then it takes a sharp turn.
Oh, boy.
It points out that Santa can be rearranged to spell Satan.
Wait, really? That's a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
It's definitely a bold claim.
Yeah.
And it goes even further,
Right?
suggesting that clause, sounding like clause, represents a satanic provision or clause in a spiritual contract.
Okay, now I'm officially creeped out. A spiritual contract with Satan? What does that even mean?
The source argues that by embracing Santa Claus,
Right.
particularly through the traditions of gift-giving and believing in his magical abilities, we are unwittingly entering into an agreement with demonic forces. It's a pretty extreme interpretation.
Yeah.
And it definitely challenges the traditional image of Santa as a benevolent figure.
So it's not just about the name Santa sounding like Satan.
Right.
There's more to it than that.
Oh, there's much more.
Yeah.
The source draws parallels between Santa's attributes,
Okay.
knowing who's naughty or nice,
Mm-hmm.
delivering gifts coming to town,
Yeah.
and the attributes often associated with God,
Right.
suggesting that Santa is a counterfeit of God, a way for Satan to deceive people into worshiping him instead of the true God.
That's pretty heavy accusation.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the sources that supports this idea of Santa being a substitute for God, or is it more of a symbolic interpretation?
It's primarily a symbolic interpretation based on those shared attributes.
Okay.
The source highlights how both figures are seen as all-knowing, all-powerful, and capable of bestowing blessings or punishments. It argues that this deliberate mirroring is a tactic used by Satan to create a false idol that distracts people from true worship.
Okay, I see how the source is making that connection. But it still feels like a big leap to go from a jolly gift giver to a demonic figure.
It is a big leap, but the source doesn't stop there. It delves into Santa's supernatural abilities,
Uh-oh.
claiming that his powers of levitation, conjuration, and even his apparent immortality all point to him being a sorcerer who uses demonic magic to achieve these feats.
Whoa. That's a far cry from the image of Santa we see in those heartwarming Christmas movies. So the source is saying he's not just a counterfeit of God, he's also a powerful sorcerer.
That's the argument it's making. It even cites Deuteronomy 18.0-12, where God condemns witchcraft and sorcery as evidence that Santa's magic is inherently evil and demonic.
Okay, so we've got this pretty terrifying interpretation of Santa Claus as a satanic figure, a counterfeit god and a powerful sorcerer. But is there anything beyond these symbolic interpretations and biblical references? Does the source provide any other evidence to support these claims?
It actually does. Remember Pastor Aston Adamambaya and his testimony about being taken to hell?
Oh yeah, that was pretty intense. What does he have to say about Santa Claus?
According to Pastor Mbaya, he encountered Father Christmas, aka Santa Claus, in hell.
No way.
He claims that Santa was in the 86th chamber of hell,
Really?
a chamber specifically designed for those who celebrate Christmas.
Wait, what? There's a special section in hell reserved just for Christmas celebrators.
That's what Pastor Mbaya claims in his testimony. He goes on to say that Jesus revealed to him that Christmas is actually a pagan holiday sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church, and that Father Christmas, or Santa, is a demon who seduces the world into celebrating it.
That's a pretty disturbing image. It's hard to imagine Santa being anything other than that jolly figure we all know and love. But this testimony paints a very different picture.
It does. And it's important to remember that this is a personal testimony.
Right.
And it should be considered within that context. We're not here to tell you what to believe, but to explore these different perspectives and encourage you to think critically about the information you're presented with.
Right. We're not saying that everyone has to believe this interpretation of Santa Claus or any of the claims made in this Christmas is satanic source.
Right.
But it's definitely eye-opening to see how different people can interpret the same traditions in such vastly different ways.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that we've only been looking at one side of the coin here.
Right.
The perspective that Christmas is essentially satanic.
Yeah.
We haven't really explored the counter-argument presented in the deeper meaning of Christmas source.
That's true.
Yeah.
We focus primarily on the more controversial claims about Christmas and its origins. So what does the deeper meaning of Christmas source have to say about all of this? Does it offer a different perspective on these pagan connections and the figure of Santa Claus?
It does.
Right.
While it acknowledges the historical blending of pagan and Christian traditions,
Uh-huh.
it emphasizes the core message of Christmas as a celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ,
Hmm.
a symbol of hope, love, and redemption. It focuses on the spiritual significance of the holiday, encouraging believers to look beyond the commercialized aspects and reconnect with the true meaning of Christmas.
So it's more about the message of Jesus' birth and the spiritual significance of that event.
Exactly. It shifts the focus away from those potentially problematic origins and emphasizes the transformative power of Jesus' coming into the world. It sees Christmas as an opportunity to reflect on God's love for humanity and to renew our commitment to faith and compassion.
So two very different interpretations of the same holiday. One focuses on the darker, hidden origins,
Yeah.
while the other emphasizes the spiritual meaning and the message of hope and redemption. It's a lot to consider.
It really is. And that's the beauty of a deep dive like this. We
Yeah.
get to explore these contrasting perspectives,
Yeah.
challenge our assumptions, and ultimately decide for ourselves what this holiday means to us.
Okay, so we've journeyed through history, symbolism, and even a personal account of hell. We've uncovered the controversial origins of Christmas traditions, explored alternative interpretations of those seemingly innocent symbols, and even questioned the very nature of Santa Claus.
It's been quite a ride. And we've only scratched the surface of this complex and fascinating topic.
Right.
But ultimately, it's up to each individual to decide how they interpret this information and what Christmas means to them.
Right. We're not here to tell you what to believe, but to equip you with knowledge and encourage you to think critically about the world around you,
Exactly.
even those traditions we often take for granted.
So as you gather with loved ones, exchange gifts, and maybe even hang a sprig of mistletoe, remember the layers of history and meaning behind those actions. Consider the diverse perspectives we've explored today and ask yourself, what does Christmas truly mean to you?
That's a great question to ponder as we head into the holiday season. It's been a fascinating deep dive, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed exploring the unexpected side of Christmas with us. Happy holidays, everyone!